All right, so you're trying to collaborate with other audio pros, share projects, get things done, but it sometimes feels like you're speaking like a different language, right?
Yeah, different DAWs, different formats.
It's a headache.
It's enough to make you want to chuck your headphones across the room.
Yeah, but fear not, because today we are diving into Chapter 6 of the Digital Performer 10 manual.
Okay.
We are tackling OMF/AAF and XML, the unsung heroes of audio collaboration.
Right, yeah.
They're here to save the day, or at least save your sanity.
Hopefully.
So let's start with OMF and AAF. What are these things? Why should our listener care? I mean, what's the point?
Well, imagine you're trying to share a complex arrangement, but the musicians don't read the same notation.
Okay.
So OMF and AAF, they're like those universal musical symbols that everybody understands. They allow you to move audio sessions between different DIWs, even if those DIWs have totally different ways of doing things.
Okay, that's pretty huge.
It is.
But I'm guessing it's not a magic bullet, right?
Right, it's not perfect.
The manual mentioned something about OMF, AAF not playing nicely with MIDI data.
Yeah.
What's the deal with that, and why does it even matter?
Okay, so think about it this way. Audio is like a recording of a performance, right?
Okay.
It's capturing the sound itself.
Right.
But MIDI is like sheet music. It contains the instructions for creating that sound.
Ah, okay.
So OMF and AAF, they're great at moving those recordings around, but
Yeah.
they don't always translate those instructions.
Okay, that makes sense. So if I'm working on a project with tons of virtual instruments, sound libraries, lots of automation, what's the workaround?
Well, that's where things get a little trickier. You might need to export your MIDI tracks separately. Or, if you're lucky and the DAW years are compatible, you might be able to do like a direct project transfer.
Yeah, fingers crossed.
Yeah.
So always check your options there.
Always.
Now, aside from that whole MIDI quirk, what else should our listener keep in mind when using OMF/AAF? I know the manual mentioned some specifics about formats and settings.
Oh, absolutely. First off, file formats. OMF and AAF are pretty good at handling common audio formats.
Okay, like what?
So we're talking like WA, FE, AIFF, even SDII.
Ah, okay.
But one format they tend to trip over is MXF audio.
Really?
It's just not their cup of tea.
Interesting. So if you're dealing with MXF, best to find another way.
Find another way to share those files, yeah.
Now, what about bit depth? The manual touched on that. I'll admit it's a bit of a head scratcher.
Yeah, no, bit depth, think of it like the resolution of your audio. Higher bit depth, more detail.
Yeah, right.
Wider dynamic range.
Makes sense.
Problem is, not all DWs support those higher resolutions when using OMF AAF.
Oh, really?
You might have to downsample to 16-bit to ensure that compatibility, which could mean sacrificing some audio fidelity.
Ah, so it's like a trade-off.
Yeah, compatibility and quality.
And what about fades?
What about them?
Do those smooth transitions between clips, do they survive the journey?
It's a mixed bag. Some DWs will interpret fades within the OMF AAF data, while others, they might ignore them altogether.
Oh, no.
Yeah, to be on the safe side, the manual actually suggests exporting your fades as separate audio regions. It might seem like an extra step, but
Yeah.
it can save you from some nasty surprises.
Yeah, better safe than sorry. Now, one last thing the manual stressed with OMF AAF is the importance of organization. Why is that so important?
Would you want to receive a sound effects library where every sound was just labeled Audio 1, Audio 2?
No way.
No, it's the same with project files. Clean, well-labeled tracks, consolidated audio files.
Right.
It all makes for a much smoother transfer process. Trust me, a little organization goes a long way.
It really does. Okay, so we've got a good handle on OMF/AAF, what it is, what it's good at, and what to watch out for, but we're not done yet. We still need to talk about XML, the other big player in DAW file interchange.
Yeah, it's a big one.
So we just spent some time talking about OMF and AAF, great for moving audio between DIWs. But what about those times when audio needs to play perfectly in sync with video edits?
That's where XML swoops in to save the day.
Like a superhero of audio-visual sync.
Exactly.
Yeah.
XML is all about precision, especially when it comes to timing information.
Yeah.
It's the language that video editing software like Final Cut Pro speaks fluently.
Right.
In fact, our Digital Performer 10 manual dives deep into how these two programs use XML to play nicely together.
And the manual gets surprisingly detailed here, right? I mean, it actually shows us what's going on under the hood of an XML file.
Yeah, it's kind of like those old school film editing rooms where you could see the individual frames of film all laid out.
Right.
The manual breaks down how an XML file references your audio and your video, pointing to exactly where each element lives on your computer.
Oh, wow. So it's not some mystical code.
No.
It's like a very organized system for keeping everything in order.
It is.
Now, for those of us working on projects that involve both audio and video, what are some key things to keep in mind about XML based on the Digital Performer Manual?
Well, first things first, you need to make sure that your DAW and your video editing software are speaking the same XML dialect.
The same dialect? What do you mean?
Yeah, think of it like accents. You know, a word might technically be the same,
Hmm.
but a different pronunciation can lead to confusion.
Ah, that makes sense. So how do we avoid any XML miscommunications?
Right. So the manual suggests sticking with XML version 4, especially when working with Final Cut Pro 6 or later. Older versions might use an outdated dialect, and nobody wants to be stuck deciphering ancient XML hieroglyphics.
Definitely not. Good point. What else?
Next up, when you're exporting from Digital Performer to Final Cut Pro, double-check those export settings. Make sure you've ticked the boxes for including both video and audio data in your XML file.
Okay, so it sounds obvious, but it's an easy one to overlook.
Super easy, especially when you're on a deadline.
Oh, for sure. Okay, any other words of wisdom from the manual?
Ah, yes. Let's talk about that dreaded missing media files warning. We've all been there.
Staring at that error message.
Like it's written in a foreign language.
Totally.
Yeah.
So what's the solution when XML suddenly loses track of our precious files?
Okay, so the manual reminds us that XML is all about file paths, those digital addresses that tell the software where to find everything.
Right.
So first things first, double-check those file paths. Did you move any folders around? Rename anything.
Right.
Even a small change can throw things out of whack.
Yeah, it's like moving houses and forgetting to update your address book.
Exactly.
Right. What else?
Another culprit can be file formats. Final Cut Pro can be a bit pickier than Digital Performer when it comes to certain audio and video formats. So stick with the tried and true, like WAV or AIFF for audio, and make sure those video codecs are compatible.
So organization and compatibility are key.
Yeah.
Just like with OMF, AF,
Yeah.
we want to avoid those digital translation errors as much as possible. Now, we've covered the basics of XML, but there's one more aspect we need to explore. XML comparison.
Yes.
This is where things get really interesting. And we are back with the grand finale of our DAW file interchange saga.
The grand finale.
We've explored OMF/AAF, we've befriended XML,
We have.
and now it's time to channel our inner detectives for XML comparison.
Put on those detective hats, everybody.
I'm ready. But first, I need a case file. What's the scenario where XML comparison really shines?
Okay, so imagine this. You're working on a project with a video editor.
Okay.
They make a cut, they move a clip, they add a whole new scene, all while you're busy perfecting the audio mix.
Happens all the time.
Right. XML comparison, it's like having a detailed record of every single change.
Okay, so instead of like going back and forth over email, like, wait, did you move that? Did I move that? It's exactly, we can see it all laid out.
It's all right there. And our Digital Performer Manual, it actually describes this brilliant visual system for this.
Oh, cool.
It uses color coding to highlight any discrepancies between the audio project in your DAW and that latest video edit.
Color coding, okay.
Yeah.
Tell me more, because I'm all about anything that makes my life easier.
Right. So it's elegantly simple, really.
Hmm.
Any audio that has been moved or deleted in the video edit, it will be marked in blue within Digital Performer.
Okay.
And anything new that's been added will be highlighted in red.
Yeah.
So it's like having this visual roadmap for all the changes.
I love it.
Right.
That sounds like a lifesaver.
Yeah,
Especially on those complex projects where every second counts.
absolutely.
But are there any potential pitfalls with XML comparison? Anything our listeners should watch out for?
Well, there are a couple things. One thing the manual points out is that while XML is great at transferring data between Final Cut Pro and Digital Performer, there can be subtle differences in how they handle, like volume and pan information. It's not always a one-to-one translation.
So always a good idea to double check those levels and make sure everything sounds right.
In the final output, yeah.
For sure.
And another thing to keep in mind is the way different programs handle stereo and surround sound.
Okay.
The manual mentions that Final Cut Pro and Digital Performer might approach panning differently, especially for surround.
Interesting. So even though XML is the common language,
Right.
there can still be some like dialectal differences.
Exactly. It's like any translation.
Right?
Nuances can get lost in the process.
For sure.
But being aware of these potential differences is half the battle.
Yeah, absolutely. So in the end, it's all about being meticulous.
Being meticulous,
Yeah.
checking your work, and maybe having a good pair of headphones handy for those final checks.
Always.
Well, there you have it. We've journeyed through the ins and outs of OMF/AAF and XML, and we've even mastered the art of XML comparison.
We did!
We went from digital decoders to DW whisperers, all thanks to this deep dive.
That's right. And remember, the Digital Performer 10 manual, it's a great place to start, but don't be afraid to experiment and explore different workflows to find what works best for you.
That's right, and who knows, you might even discover some hidden features or develop your own unique approach to dyed-up collaboration. That's the beauty of audio, isn't it?
Absolutely. There's always something new to learn and explore. And on that note, we'll leave you with one final thought to ponder. We've talked a lot about how Final Cut Pro and Digital Performer interact, but what about other DAWs? What about other video editing software? Do they use similar systems? Do they have their own quirks? It's something to explore as you continue your audio adventures.
Have fun.
Until next time, keep creating and keep those collaborative juices flowing.